like microphones. Can you hear me okay, or do I need the mic? I think we're all right? Okay. If at some point here you can't hear me, just holler and I'll use the mic. First thing I want to do is I want to recognize my chief deputy that's here with me, James Foster. James, you can stand up. My wife, Michelle. So, you know, it's a great opportunity to come and speak to all of you. You know, whether or not you live in Bonneville County, I'm sure there are probably a few of you that don't, but you also have a sheriff in your county. And the office of the sheriff is an important office. And it's critical to our communities for a lot of reasons. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I was born here in Idaho Falls. I grew up here. I went to Ethel Boys in Eagle Rock, Ethel Boys Elementary School and Eagle Rock Junior High School, and I guess they call that middle school now. And then I went to Bonneville High School. My family moved, and I ended up going to Bonneville High School and finishing out my high school years. Got married to Michelle when we were pretty young. You know, I thought I knew everything at that point in life, you know, figured I had it all figured out, like we all do at about that age. Ended up going to Idaho State University for the law enforcement program there. I got hired on. My first job was as an undercover narcotics detective put back in South Fremont High School for a kid who was selling drugs in South Fremont High School. I did some undercover work. Back then, obviously, I looked that age, and so I was able to do that. And anybody who says that they would like to go back to high school and repeat those years, you really don't. Try doing that when you're 21 and going back in there. So that was an experience, and I was working at the time for the Madison County Sheriff's Office, and that was just a short little stint. And then I went to Clark County, and I worked in Clark County there by the Montana border. Where all of you know where that is, just up the I-15 corridor there. We spent 5.5 years working in Clark County, and then my wife and I, we wanted to come back home. And I actually got out of law enforcement for just a short period of time. I think I was a little delusional, and I went to work for Larson Farms as his human resource manager. I started in the dehydration plant, and then took over his corporate human resources for a period of time. And I love Blaine Larson, but I hated that job. Absolutely hated that job, just because it wasn't what my heart was called to. And so I got out of that, and come down here to Bonneville County, came back home, went to work for the sheriff here, Sheriff Stommel at the time, and that's all I've ever done is work for sheriff's offices other than that short stint in the private sector there with Larson Farms. And you know, the experiences that I've been able to have as a deputy sheriff and now as the sheriff are quite amazing. And I want to tell you a little bit about your sheriff's office, because I think sometimes you're all busy and you don't see what we see. You see what the news media tells you. You don't necessarily see what's going on in your community. And you're certainly not out there with us, or most of you are not out there with us at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I tell my deputies all the time that our culture is what we do on a traffic stop at 3 o'clock in the morning. Doesn't matter what's written in policy, doesn't matter any of that. It's what you do as an individual deputy to uphold the rights of the citizens at 3 o'clock in the morning out there on a traffic stop. And you have honorable deputies in this community. I want you to know that. They do a good job. With that, I want to run through a couple of slides that'll just give you some numbers. And of course, I think it timed out because I talked too much. We have our tech guy running around here. I think just the projector. We'll give it I know it'll take just a second to think through this. And I don't know. Yeah, we might need to turn lights down. It's phasing. So I just want to tell you a little bit about this sheriff's office. You know, it's very different in the western part of the United States compared to the eastern part of the United States. You go back to the eastern side of the country, there's a lot of sheriffs that have given up a lot of the traditional powers of the sheriff. And so they are relegated just to jails and civil. And sometimes they don't even have their jails, all they have are the civil divisions that they run. But that's a big piece of what we do. But we are a western full-service sheriff's office, and so we do a lot of stuff. So we have our 208 personnel and 40 volunteers that serve this community. That's where we're standing right now as a sheriff's office. We're pretty much the 4th largest sheriff's office in the state. And sometimes we vie with the other sheriff's offices. Sometimes we'll bump up to 3rd, and then we drop back to 4th. But we're 4th right behind Kootenai and Canyon counties. So we have our main patrol group, and that consists of roughly 80 personnel that are in that group, and they're carved out into different duties that they perform. And that Ammon patrol group is carved out of that. So we police for the city of Ammon. We have a contract with that city. It's something that really creates some synergism where we're able to provide the service at less cost than if they had their own police department. So we're able to police for them and create a benefit both to us as a sheriff's office, to the citizens of Bonneville County, and to the citizens of Ammon that live inside that incorporated city. So we're pretty proud of that contract, and we've for decades had one level of a contractor or another, but this one is pretty healthy right now, and I think we do a fantastic job out there for them. We have the District 93 School Resource Officer, and so we have 7 school resource officers now, and we have those assigned to the high schools and to the middle schools, and then they also have duties in each of the elementary schools. And so they're a busy group, and we have a supervisor that helps supervise that group, but he's also spread kind of thin with his functions as a PIO for us, our public information officer. You probably see him on TV a lot. Brian Lovell, you guys have probably seen him doing different news stories. He's our public information officer as well. And he's also the state chairman for state fraternal order of police here in Idaho. We have our main detectives group and our special investigations unit. The special investigations unit handles all your narcotics crime as well as vice crimes, those kinds of things that are going on out there in the community that require a little bit more investigation. And that is a unit that is in conjunction with the city of Idaho Falls as well. So they add 2 detectives and a sergeant, and we add 2 detectives and a sergeant, and we work in conjunction. And that SIU unit does cases up and down the valley through the Tri-County Sheriff's Association, which is a memorandum of understanding between 17 sheriffs in this eastern corridor. So basically, from the Montana border all the way down to the Utah border, we have the sheriffs in an MOU where we work together to help each other if they need resources or equipment. And some of our, that cross deputization, those deputies are able to basically function across all those borders. We have our warrants and extradition unit. That group is responsible for transporting people around, and they go all over the country. If we have somebody who's under a serious warrant that we need to get back here, that they fled from Bonneville County, the last one they picked up was in New York City. They went and flew back on an aircraft to get him back here. So they end up kind of all over the place, and they do a lot of local transports as well, especially for mental health transports from the behavioral health center down to the state hospital in Blackfoot. So they're a busy group as well. We have our backcountry mountain rescue. You've probably seen those trucks out there. They've got usually a motorcycle in the back with the big heavy trucks with push wheels on the front. And a lot of them say mountain rescue on the side. That group is 5 individuals, and they're basically responsible for everything that is east of Ryrie, wrapping around into Swan Valley, all of those mountainous areas and the areas that we have to police up there. And we have a strong rescue footprint. They rescue people all the time. I'm really proud of that group and their skills and what they do in the backcountry. And I certainly hope you don't ever get the chance to meet them when you meet them, because you're probably in a bad situation. But they're backed up by our search and rescue unit, which is the 40 volunteers that I talked about. We could not do search and rescue in this county if we didn't have those volunteers. They're lifesavers for us. And that's a great organization. And if you're interested, I'd encourage you to look into that organization. that is a lot of selfless people that are doing hard things, and when they get that call at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to go look for a lost hunter or a crashed snow machine, all of those things, we couldn't do that without them. And the sheriff in each of their individual counties are responsible for search and rescue anywhere in the county, whether it's federal land or not. We're responsible for the search and rescue on that land. So all of that forest area that we have up on our eastern border, the sheriff is still responsible to rescue people if they're back in their region, or if we can't find them, we've got to go search and look for them. So that's backcountry, and then we have our Marine Patrol. The Office of the Sheriff is also responsible for all waterways enforcement inside the county, and that includes all the stuff right down in the center of the city of Idaho Falls. That is still our responsibility for enforcement on those waterways, and also for rescuing people on those. We do have some work that we've done with the Idaho Falls Fire Department, where we help train them in swift water rescue, because we know they have those fire stations all right here. So they've been able to help us rescue people out of around the falls area. We usually have people every year that either drowned or get compromised down in there by the river, and we have to rescue them off the rocks and those kinds of things. And in conjunction with the city of Idaho Falls, I think we do a pretty good job at that. Our jail operations, we are the 4th largest jail in Idaho. We have a capacity for 525 beds right now in our facility. As of Tuesday morning, we were at 290 inmates in our jail currently. So we are not at full capacity, and obviously I can talk a little bit about COVID and what that's doing to us as far as our intakes and how we have to handle some of that stuff in the jail facility. We have had COVID in our jail. I have 6 individuals that are just getting over COVID in the jail facility, and so that's been kind of interesting. Now that one just, okay, so the work release, we have in conjunction with the jail, we have a work release program. It is currently shut down due to COVID and the spiky numbers that we're seeing with the Delta variant. And so we have that closed off. We are still doing our work detail, but work release is basically a person, they come into the jail and spend the night there, and they can go back out and do their job during the day. So they can serve in jail while still making money and keeping their job, which can be a big deal for some folks. And it's also kind of a step down unit, so maybe they've been incarcerated for quite a while, and now they're ready to go out. They can get a job, get their feet back under them, and then get to where they're out there working in the community, and then get released. And so COVID has caused us some issues with that, but that operation is still there, still ready to be stood back up. And we did have it back up and running until about 3 weeks ago, that we had to take it back offline. So that's the court security piece, and then civil. Civil is a big responsibility of the sheriff. So all of the paper service, that civil division is extremely busy. We have 2 deputies that are assigned to that, and I have 4 clerical personnel plus a supervisor who take in all those papers. So if you need a civil document served, that's one of the ways you can have it served, is it comes through there. Plus we have all of our writs, that whole side of the law on civil law, which is voluminous, and we could spend all night just on a couple factors of civil law. It is that's the thing that gets me sued the second most. So the jail gets me sued the most for tort claims, and then the civil division gets me sued the second, and then patrol. So that's kind of the way that breaks down, and I guess what you could say the liability risk for the county and for the sheriff's office. Driver's license, I think everybody, who of those in the room, how many of you have been frustrated standing in line for driver's license? Well, let me apologize to you. That is a process that we administer for the state. The sheriffs, we are, I believe, the only state left where the sheriffs have that responsibility still. I kind of take that seriously because we want you to have a good experience there. But we are administering a state process, and we did have, they instituted a new computer program a few years ago, and it kind of broke everything for a while. It was really rough. And then with COVID, all the stuff that was going on around that created issues for us in processing. So that is what I would say is less than a stellar process. We are, as sheriffs, looking at how we improve that. but we have to work with the state government to put that together. So that's kind of how that works. So it's a state system that we administer in each of the counties. And there is some interest in turning that into just a state rent system. My fear in that, just so you know, is they'll regionalize it. And then you'll be driving to a regional area, which may not be Idaho Falls, because the transportation department will regionalize that, and then we would have to go wherever that is. The sheriffs are divided on that. The last time they took a vote on it, it was 17 to 17 as to whether or not to keep it or get rid of it. I voted to keep it. I think that's the right thing to do. So that's kind of that side of the operation. And then our specialty teams, we have a dive rescue team. It's one of the best trained dive rescue teams in the state of Idaho. We have our SWAT unit, Special Weapons and Tactics. There's a lot of nonsense gets spun up around SWAT units. I can talk to you a little bit about that. But that's a critical component. We save a lot of lives with that SWAT unit in taking people into custody and keeping everybody safe. It's a critical thing that we do in the community. And then we have our K-9 program. We have 4 K-9s. They are all cross-trained, which means they are trained to detect drugs, and they're also trained for apprehension. So we can set them on you to bite you and hold you until we can get a hold of you. And we had a recent experience with that. There's a great video of it where you maybe saw on East Idaho News where we were pitting that car over on Hit Road here. Yeah, the several pits. Anyway, that gentleman ended up climbing out of the car with a very long samurai sword, and we were able to take him out with the dog getting a hold of him, so we didn't have to shoot him. So that saved his life. He did need some wound care from the dog bite, but at least he didn't end up being shot and killed. So we do end up saving a lot of life with our actions, and that is always a critical part of the importance of a sheriff's office. We are there to bring people into custody with reasonable level of force, right? But sometimes when you're trying to deal with somebody who's completely unreasonable, you have to ratchet that force up. And unfortunately, we see that more now than we used to. And I'll talk a little bit about what we're just seeing as far as volume. So I apologize, it's a little tough for you to see, but this is our population growth. And basically it factors out to 2 or 3% every year since 2017. So 2 to 3% growth in our county every year. And now we're up to 121,674 people in Bonneville County. That includes everybody in the county. That's also your cities, right? Everybody, all property holders pay county tax, whether they're in the city or not. They're still paying that assessment tax, which most of you realize that. These are our incidents, and from 2017, we're there at 43,876, all the way up to 49,066 last year. Now, when I talk about incidents, that's anything that activates us. So that could be us doing a traffic stop, that could be removing debris out of the roadway, anything where we get on the radio and we check out, that's an incident. And then you drop down here to the cases. That's where we've actually stamped a case, and that's something that we're actively working on when we charge somebody criminally. So that's that casework. And if you noticed, it dropped down a little bit in 2020. That is a direct result of the reduction in certain types of services of warrants and things like that related to COVID. That's causing us to change the way we were interacting. And so we're seeing that. Plus the courts have been shut down. Yes, sir.
I can't read the numbers. You said 49,000 incidents. What's the cases?
The cases are 6,247.
Thank you.
And obviously a case can take an hour and a half to write and manage, not counting your court time and all of those things, or up to several days, depending on what it is. Yes, sir.
When you say incident, does that mean, for instance, let's suppose somebody's charged with 5 different counts of crimes. Does each incident, would that be 5 incidents? That would be one incident, 5 charges. Okay.
Right, one incident, and then the crime breakdown would come after that. So one incident, again, might take you 5 minutes to deal with. Another incident could take you 5 days. You know, it just depends on the situation. The incident is just that activation of that deputy. These are our calls by time of day, and if you notice, you're kind of that 3 o'clock. That 3 o'clock is our spike, but you can see it drops in the morning hours, but it's still fairly busy. You know, we're still having over that time frame for 2020, we're still having over 300 calls at 4 o'clock in the morning. So you have to have a 24-hour footprint to be able to manage all of those things. So it's a busy office. And then this is your day of the week breakdown, and Thursday is currently winning and has done for a long time. It's just it's always the busiest day. But there's also, a lot of that is internal process with the courts and different things like that. Saturday and Sunday continue to be generally our more violent times, right? When we're having those interactions that are higher risk and more violence involved. Mental health incidents, I think this one is interesting to look at. As mental health, I can't give you a reason why our culture seems to be changing, or if we're just better at identifying some of these things, or if it is, I think it's also a direct function of the population. As your population goes up, you have some of these things. So we just see a lot more mental health related incidents, dealing with people, a lot of suicidal ideation, a lot of actively suicidal folks, and we have to deal and interact with those, and they can be quite time consuming and highly risky, as well as taking a lot of folks into custody that have mental illness that are not compliant with treatment for whatever reason, and they're just not stable. So we deal with a lot of people who are delusional. The gentleman with the samurai sword, he was delusional. That's why he's doing what he was doing. He believed that he was God, and they needed to give him gasoline, and they weren't giving him gasoline. That's what upset him, because he believed he owned the pumps, and they should just pump gas for him. And so he was completely just delusional and not in the right frame of mind. Some of that is driven by drugs, not all of it. Some of it is driven by drug intoxication. When you look at what they call co-occurring disorders, it's about 80% of the population has a substance use issue, where they're abusing a drug, and a mental illness at the same time. And we can argue which came first. Was it the illness that they're medicating, or did they take the drugs and now develop a things? I think both are true. It's just hard to discern that stuff out. So those incidents are continuing to climb. Backcountry, this group, like I said, I love these guys. One of the things that we saw with COVID though was everybody went to the backcountry. They went back there camping and riding their razors, and they haven't stopped since because they've all discovered it. And part of that's that growth, more people coming into the area. But what we used to see on the Bone Road and what we see just traffic volumes on the Bone Road now, exponentially different. And so our community is changing, and we have more people in it, and more people getting out there and interacting in the backcountry areas. So that's basically over this time frame from 2017 to 2020. That's a 94% increase in call volume out there, and we have yet to add personnel to that unit. So we are under some pressures as a sheriff's office, needing to add people, add ability to respond into these areas. And as you've all seen, Swan Valley is growing, and there's starting to be more people living it that way. And this unit is the unit that's responsible for that. This is our crime data, our UCR crime data that we report to the state. And you can see there's a couple concerning things that we see here for our Part A crimes, which is basically we've got a 14% increase in these Part A type crimes, and these are what we consider the more serious crimes in our community. And so that's changing. And one of the things that is the concerning thing is the forcible rape. You see that's up considerably. And you can always ask yourself, is that because we're receiving more reports because now people feel more comfortable coming forward, or are we really seeing that level of increase? And the stolen property increases, things like that. It is not a community where you can leave your doors unlocked and your keys in your car. If you do that, there's a good chance your car is going to get stolen, right? This is going to happen because people go around looking to see what's the easy pick, right? How can we, what's the path of least resistance? So the days of, where we just left stuff out, you can't do that anymore. There are people that will take your stuff and they'll steal your car. We've got a big problem with catalytic converters being cut off of vehicles right now. So they'll pull up, they just drop under your car, saw the catalytic converter off, and they're gone. And you get in, turn your car on, you start getting all the weird lights and everything else. That's a big deal that's going on right now, and it's because there are rare earth metals in that catalytic converter, and they have a market for them. We're trying to figure out where they're going, but that's a big deal. So even parking your car out on the street, somebody might crawl under it with Sawzall and take your catalytic converter. And we've had a pretty high increase. It's been, yeah, huge increase in that. And we do see organized theft rings. That's the other thing I want you to realize. We see groups that come through. They're not from here, and they're coming through and they're taking advantage. They're going through the construction sites, stealing expensive equipment, diverting it out of the area. These are organized criminals. They've got plans about how they do this and how they exploit a community. We see them come into different businesses and do shoplifting. Like we had a group that came through that they basically walked into Cabela's and they had a bag and they just started throwing expensive everything they could throw in and walked right out the door. As you know, most of the loss control groups are told to not intervene. Don't intervene, right? So they reported to us, and luckily we got onto the car and were able to catch it. But they had stuff from stores from here to Utah that were packed into that car. And then they're gonna go back to a central hub where that stuff is parted out. So a lot of organized crime that we see. So that's basically the information that I have for you about our office. Obviously we could spend a ton of time. We have a gang problem, you know. If somebody doesn't realize that, there is a gang problem. You'll see they're tagging around town, the different things they're doing. The organized gangs that are in our area are primarily Sereno tied out of California. So you have Sereno, which means south side, you have Norte, which means north side. The Serenos run a lot of drugs, and they tie directly to the Mexican cartels. Those cartels are producing the drugs, bringing it over the border. Sometimes they bring the components over the border and then produce the drugs. So big problems with opiates. That has transitioned into fentanyl. Fentanyl is extremely dangerous. We're seeing that heavily. And a lot of that is manufactured in China and coming over the southern border. So no question, the world isn't as big as it used to be as far as reach and what comes into our community. And living along the I-15 corridor, it's a direct route, and we see a ton of drug trafficking up through our area. So that's a very real problem, and a real challenge for us is the addiction side of things. And one of the things I realized a long time ago, we are not going to arrest our way out of an addiction problem. You have to get treatment for those people. We can arrest them 100 times. If there isn't a treatment modality for them to help them get clean, and you can lead a horse to water, right? They have to decide that they want to get clean. But we're doing a lot of things to direct them towards treatment services. So now when you come to the Bonneville County Jail, if we recognize that you have an opiate addiction, we're gonna try to get you handed off to treatment services rather than just cycle you through, because we'll see you right back. If you don't get that drug addiction under control, we'll see you right back. The other thing is, we all have in our mind what an addict looks like. The truth is, some of the addicts that you're gonna interact with would surprise you. A lot of them are holding down 9-to-5 jobs. And addiction is out there. We see a lot of people who get addicted to, say, hydrocodones or something, oxycodone, and they think they're getting oxy, but they can't get prescriptions anymore, so they start getting it off the street. And instead of getting a true oxy, they get what we call a dirty 30. It's actually fentanyl that's been pressed to look like an oxy. They take it overdoses them, and they die. And we've seen a lot of that in our community. So that's a real risk out there, y'all. And that's why you see the drug take-back programs, talking about getting the drugs out of your cabinets, all those things. The opiate addiction, the crisis is here in Idaho. It's come through. If you would have told me when I started this business that I would be putting Narcan on the deputies, the nasal Narcan, they're all wearing it. They all have to carry it. We put it on them first because we worried about their exposure to the fentanyl. But they have reversed a ton of overdoses with that, and it's here in our community. And you know, I think our best luck, if you look at that, is to draw that addict population back in and let them know that they do matter, because we're going to lose a whole generation to that crap if we're not careful. So we need vocal about it. We need to be talking about the drug addiction. We need to be doing things within our community to help people get better. And it's not a problem that we can punish out. It just doesn't work. So that's what I've got as far as a presentation. Obviously, I think you folks have a lot of questions for me. So I would stand for some questions. Yes, sir.
What was the population of Bonneville County again?
It was just over 121,000. 121,000. It's a change. Yes.
So when you watched that non-compliant movie, what was your feelings on that?
So my feelings is she's obviously very intelligent, and I want to read some of her books. I haven't had a chance to read some of her books. I think that what she's saying really, Chris Ann Hall, what she's saying is it kind of calls us all out to what we have in our hearts, which we know to be true, is that the individual, that sovereign individual, your inalienable rights, is the most important thing, right? We all know that. We've enshrined that in our Constitution. So we see that, and she speaks to that. My concern is we have a process, a government that allows you to redress the government. Right? The First Amendment in the Bill of Rights tells you that you have the right to redress. Right? So you can do that. You can assemble peacefully, and you can come together as people and talk. You have the freedom of speech. Man, that's powerful, right? So when somebody says, "I'm not going to the ballot box. I'm not pushing the button," when you're saying, "I'm going to take myself out of the participation," that concerns me, because I don't know where that ends, right? Because ultimately we have a system. We can all recognize that the federal government is probably larger than our founders ever wanted it. We can all recognize that maybe they're into some things that we're not comfortable with, or that they shouldn't be involved in. But there is a system that we have to operate in to change that. And the most important thing is that people are paying attention. Because what happens is a lot of people don't pay attention. Or they just want to make sure that whatever they're getting through those federal dollars are secure. You can take away all these programs, but don't take away mine, right? And that gets us down some of these roads. But, so I agree with some of what she says, but there's a portion there that I can't go down, because at the end of the day, I serve as a elected official, and so I have a framework that I have to operate in. And if I can't operate in that framework, then I shouldn't have the badge, right? I mean, ultimately, I have to step out because I can't be an insurrectionist and the sheriff. Does that answer your question?
Sure. I just wondering.
Yeah. So that's, I think she's very intelligent. I would love to read her books. Very articulate. And she calls it to your heart. You know, that's there. But I can't go down that. You know, well, and one thing that bothered me, so you know, she says the sheriffs are blindly enforcing. I have a prosecutor. We investigate. We present those investigations to the prosecutor. The prosecutor charges to the courts. And it's just important that people understand that. And a lot of times what I find is people don't know the system. I see people say, well, you arrested this guy and he got out 2 days ago. You guys are crooked. You're not doing your job. No, he has the right to bail. Right? He has the right to bail. It is not excessive. So it's understanding the system and why we do what we do. Yes, sir.
This may be an appropriate time to ask this question. I need to set it up a little bit. In the last 24-hour news cycle, there are two letters came to light in the national media. The first one was from the National School Board Administration to our president, Joseph Biden. Subject is federal assistance to stop threats and acts of violence against public school children, public school board members, and other public school district officials and educators. That's the subject line. Dear Mr. President, America's public schools and its education leaders are under immediate threat. The National School Boards Association respectfully asks for federal law enforcement and other assistance to deal with the growing number of threats of violence and acts of intimidation occurring across the nation. Fast forward. coupled with attacks against school board members and educators for approving policies for masks to protect the health and safety of students and school employees, many public school officials are also facing physical threats because of propaganda purporting the false inclusion of critical race theory within classroom instruction and curriculum. Then it goes on and says, NSB respectfully asks that a joint collaboration among federal law enforcement agencies, state and local law enforcement, and with public school officials be undertaken to focus on these threats. NSB specifically solicits the expertise and resources of the U.S. Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Secret Service, and its National Threat Assessment Center regarding the level of risk to public school children, educators, board members, and facility campuses. As these acts of malice, violence, and threats against public school officials have increased, the classification of these heinous actions could be the equivalent to a form of domestic terrorism and hate crimes. Okay, it goes on, it's 5 pages long.
And that's from the National School Board?
That's from National School Board to President Biden.
To President Biden.
Yes. October 4th, the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, took action, basically as a response to this, and it was a memorandum for the Director of Federal Bureau of Investigation, Executive Office of the U.S. Attorneys, Assistant Attorney General, Criminal Division, United States Attorneys. And the crux of this letter is, coordination and partnership with local law enforcement is critical to implementing these measures for the benefit of our nation's nearly 14,000 public school districts. To this end, I am directing the Federal Bureau of Investigation, working with each United States attorney, to convene meetings with federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial leaders in each federal jurisdiction district within 30 days of the issuance of this memorandum. These meetings will facilitate the discussions of strategies for addressing threats against school administrators, board members, teachers, and staff, and will be dedicated lines of communication for threat reporting, assessment, and response. The news media is reporting that this is really an attempt to silence our parents that are attending school board meetings that are voicing their opinions about mask mandates, vaccine mandates, and what's being taught in school, critical race theory, and other social agenda type. So my question is this: to what extent does your authority go to involve yourself with a memorandum like this? I mean,
So a memorandum to work with the federal enforcement?
basically, yeah, and basically, to me, it seems like what they're doing is trying to make our freedom of speech a federal crime, so they can invoke federal agencies to become involved in our local politics.
So I think that part of what's occurring is when you get into somebody going to a school board meeting and standing up and saying their piece, about their issues with the school board or anything else, that has to be able to happen, right? You should be able to get up there. The big problem we get into is when individuals begin to threaten violence or begin to do things that are intimidating or threatening. Then you start to cross out of what are allowed within your rights, and you get into activities you cannot do, right? And when you see a letter like that, I guess my first question would be, what is driving that? What are the actual events that are driving that? Because they're probably not occurring in eastern Idaho, right? They're probably in some other areas. We have had a lot of contentious meetings where people have spoken their minds, but that's okay, right? We can do that. But when it begins to devolve into the threat of violence, and remember, whether you're on the far left or the far right, there is a contingent in each camp who all they want to do is watch it burn. Don't ever forget that. Their only desire is to tear it down, whether that's from a leftist Marxist agenda or from a far right, I need to take back what our country was agenda, once you believe that you can use violence to do that, you are now outside of where you need to be, right? If we can't have the voice, if we can't speak to one another, if we can't maintain our republic, then don't think for a minute that you're gonna stand it back up as good as our founders did. I listen quite often to a clinical psychologist. His name is Jordan Peterson. There's a couple of books out there. I highly recommend you look at his stuff and watch his stuff and read it. Very intelligent guy. He's on the liberal side. But he says, read history as though you were a perpetrator, not that you were a hero. So when you look at the Holocaust, ask yourself why so many people in Germany stood by while those people were murdered, and realize that most likely you would be one of the ones who helped enforce it. So remember, read history as though you were a perpetrator, and be very cautious of undermining or turning over a system that is in place that allows you to redress your government, because it works. Just recently in California, do you remember when they shut down the pastor down there? They shut down his church, and he sued him. Guess who won? The pastor. He won a $400,000 judgment against the city of Los Angeles for closing his church. My point is, the system works. Your rights are in place. Yes, sir.
So Larry Elders ran for governor during that re-election thing. One of his main points was women can now marry the government, and all of these kids without a dad. And he quoted statistics that Obama even used, saying how many of these kids are prone to be incarcerated and commit these crimes. What is your feeling about that issue here in Idaho? Do we have most of our crime committed by kids who have no dad?
I think in general, you have to be very careful categorizing one group as being, this is the group causing the problem. The truth is, like drug addiction, for example, it's no respecter of your socioeconomic status. I've seen people that were millionaires that developed a drug addiction, and people that didn't have anything develop drug addiction. And then that addiction drives certain behaviors that causes them to get into the criminal realm, right? So yes, is the breakdown of the traditional family a problem? I think we can all see that. And if we build systems that disallow that, and you know, Jordan Peterson speaks to this a lot, about the importance of a male role model in the home, what that does for the children and how it stabilizes them. Now, does that mean I'm speaking against single mothers? No, absolutely not. They have a tremendous burden. I can't imagine trying to raise my children alone. The truth is, I wouldn't be standing up here if it wasn't for the fact that I married a good woman. I married above my station, like my dad told me to. If I hadn't done that, that would have certainly caused a problem for me. But I guess my point is, you can't pinpoint it down to one thing, and I think we have to be very careful when we do that.
So you don't see that statistic at all about?
I believe it's a part of it. It's certainly a part of it, especially in the inner cities, where you have generations that haven't had a father in the home. And that just downturns, right? Because if you look at what a mother can teach versus what a responsible father can teach, and that's your best luck, or a responsible male role model, that's your best luck of getting a balanced, productive citizen. And I do think that plays out. I think that does show. And so to that point, I would agree with you. I don't think it's the whole problem. Okay? I don't know if I answered your question. Because you were talking about.
I think as we go on, it'll
come out. Okay. Yes, sir.
Actually, it kind of plays into what you was talking about a little bit. First of all, thank you for coming. I really respect you, and I respect your office and everything that you guys do for us. So thank you. I was curious and wondering, because I don't know the process, but as far as federal interaction with how the sheriffs interact in the city,
Okay.
There's talk, and maybe it's false news, but just to preface it, is that that there is a movement to have a national security force that may override sheriffs, may override local police. Do you have the authority to say, no, we're not going to follow that kind of thing because that's coming from the federal side?
So basically, one thing that you have to realize is there is a supremacy clause. And it says that the federal government is the supreme, okay? So everything rolls down from them. So this idea, no. I understand you. I understand there are those of you that are gonna disagree with me. I understand that. I'm happy to have the discussion. But I can show you in the Constitution where the Supremacy Clause exists.
Okay, show us.
Okay. So,
Article 6.
Article 6,
Section
Section
2.
2 of the Constitution. You have your Constitution with you? Article 6, Section 2. It's right there. It is right there. But that the laws have to align with the Constitution, right?
As long as they don't violate.
Right. So as long as that law does not violate the Constitution, that law stands. So what that means is if you violated federal law and there is a federal agent coming after you because you have violated the federal law, they can come get you. And we're gonna want you, we're gonna want you to present yourself peacefully and go with the federal agent because they have jurisdiction. I do not serve federal law. So that's not something that I do. But quite often, we'll have a U.S. Marshal who calls us and says, we're coming to Bonneville County. We have a fugitive from whatever state, could be a murderer, could be any number of things. He is in your area. We have tracked him. Will you help us? The answer to that is yes, because we're here to protect the peace and to protect the people. Now, as long as those agents are operating within their authority, under constitutional laws, they have jurisdiction anywhere in the U.S. Does that help?
Can I expand on that a little bit? Are you familiar with the law of the Lesser Magistrate? Which basically, it's kind of what you're saying there is that if the federal marshal or whoever is coming in, but they're violating a constitutional law, then you would step in and say, no, they do not violate that constitutional law. So the law of the Lesser Magistrate says that even though the Constitution may say they have the law, but if they're breaking the law themselves, then you can step in and say, no, we are not gonna allow you to take them or whatever.
So I think it's contingent upon each one of us to stop something that we know to be unlawful. We have a duty to act, is what it's called. That's how it's put on us as peace officers. If I see somebody who is violating the law, so that might be using excessive force, for example, I have a duty to act as a peace officer to stop that. And if that's another enforcement person, I have a duty to act to stop them in their unlawful action. So if it is an unlawful action, I have a duty to act, and we would take that appropriate duty. But if they are serving a lawful process in conjunction with what is held out as lawful process, they can do that. And they have authority. Does that help? So as long as it's a lawful process. But they can't be acting unlawfully, for sure. Ma'am?
Article 6, Section 2, though, does have a clause. It says, establishes the Constitution and federal laws made pursuant to it. This letter is not pursuant to the Constitution. So the Supremacy Clause.
Are you speaking about his letter?
Yes.
Yeah, because you're exactly right, because what they're doing is they're asking for assistance. They would still have to operate within the laws that are in place, right? So they can't invent, you were talking about like a national security force or something like that. They can't invent something like that without a lot of work to do, because they would be undermining the sovereignty of the state, right? That's what we're set up on, right? So they have to tear down certain pillars of the Constitution to be able to do something like this.
But we operate under case law more often than we ever do under constitution law, which is a total
And what is
destruction.
case law, sir?
A lawful, supposed lawful, action of the police that didn't get squashed, and now it becomes the case or the way in which,
So case law is the judicial ruling, right? And that, I'm not here to argue with your philosophy. I'm here to just basically state the way it's working, right? All day long, I can agree with you if you say, hey, look, I don't believe that this law is in agreement with the Constitution as I read it, right? I don't believe that this law, whatever law it is.
But that's what we wanna know from you,
Yeah.
is that you read the
Well-
Constitution and how you interpret.
So who interprets the constitutionality of a law? The courts, the judiciary. That is a branch of our government. And that is who interprets whether or not that is constitutional. It is the judiciary. And I know some of you don't respect that or don't agree with it. But it is how it works. It is what happens every day in our society. I do not decide what is constitutional when it's related to case law. The judicial branch does. I am an executive in the executive branch. I don't do that. It doesn't work that way. It's not constitutional for it to work outside that. The branches have their responsibility. So who do we redress if we don't agree with the court? The legislative branch. That legislative branch needs to sanction what the court is doing and say, no, we're gonna tell you now, because you didn't get it the first time, that you can't do that, judiciary. Here is what we're telling you as the legislative branch as the representative of the people. That's the way I read the Constitution as to how it's supposed to work. You have to have the balancing and opposing three branches of government. If we throw one out, we're no longer talking about a constitutional republic, right? We have to have all three branches functioning. And if you want me to be a power unto myself, think about that for a minute. Because you may agree with me today, but I guarantee you, you don't want me making the rules. You want me answering to
That's why we
the
voted
branches
for
of
you to
government.
make
What's that?
That's why we voted for you, to make some decision.
Sure, decisions, absolutely, I agree. I will make decisions, but within the framework of the law. Within the framework of the law, I will make the decisions. And in conjunction with the prosecutor, who is also an elected office. I don't stand by myself. I have responsibilities and I have checks and balances. The commissioners balance me with my budget. The prosecutor balances me by looking at what my actions were and whether they were lawful or not, and if this person should really be charged or not. And so does the judicial branch balance me, right? Because where you center authority, you want a balance on that. You want a check and a balance. Go ahead, you had your hand up, sir.
So, you say you have systems in place. So why do the feds need to stick their noses in here? Why don't you just say, it's okay, we're good?
Because they have federal law.
Why?
Do you-
Because I call the FBI and say, come on down to the school board meeting.
Well, no,
It's time to come on into Idaho.
No,
Come on down.
I think that when that gets this into a little bit of a mischaracterization, if somebody is threatening violence or doing harm to others or doing something that is insurrectionist in nature, then you're going to get the federal authorities taking a look at that. Now, I agree, they have their place and the things that they should be doing, and we don't want overreach of the federal government.
Yeah.
And I agree, I can probably match with you on probably, 85, 90% of how you feel about a bloated federal government. We can all see it. What I'm telling you is the way you resolve that is by working the system that is in place. You have to get with your legislative branches of government. You have to pay attention to what's occurring. You have to watch the local school board elections. You have to vote for your elected officials. You have to pay attention to what's occurring as a citizen. Because if you don't, then all of a sudden you're like, hey, how did we get here? Right? And so I think we have to recognize that we're standing on a point in place where we are all citizens of the federal government, and we all are citizens of a sovereign state within that agreed to the union of the states, right? So we're under that umbrella, and we want to be under that umbrella. If you read the Federalist Papers, you can see the arguments as to why we had to have that federal umbrella. Think of where we would be if we were a loose conglomeration of states, or if the Confederacy had won and Lincoln hadn't preserved the Union. Where would we be today? We would be torn asunder is where we would be. So that Union has protected us with the larger umbrella. We can argue all day long. Maybe they've gotten out of whack with some of the rules that they put in place and some of the branches that have been allowed to develop, whichever ones you're not happy with. I can see where, hey, why are you here and why are you doing this? We have a lot of pushback on the EPA, the Food and Drug Administration. You know, all of those things that are out there, I think the way we deal with that is through conversation. But to say, I don't answer to federal authorities, I don't see how we get there.
Well, just to question it, to say, hey, the people that I represent don't want you here.
Well, this person, if I could use you as an example,
Okay, sure.
may not want them here, right? But you may have a situation that violates federal law that they have to investigate. And you have U.S. attorneys that have that same responsibility. They're in Pocatello, they're down there, they have a responsibility to investigate violations of the federal law. And they're going to investigate them. And they're acting within their authority. Now again, they can't violate the law, they can't do something unconstitutional. But if they're answering a federal process and they're doing it correctly, I would certainly be willing to help mediate and have a discussion if that was needed, and to make decisions based on that. And I certainly hope I don't ever find myself in a place, I'm afraid of this too, where I no longer think that the federal government is acting in conjunction with the Constitution.
Yeah.
That's a scary thing, right? Yes, sir.
When you talk about federal government authority and coming into the state, you're talking, you know, I really respect what I hear you talking about. I love Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, he's great.
He's a great guy.
Yeah.
And I love the Constitution, and I hear you talking constitutional principles here, and I really respect that, okay? Federal government is restricted to federal activities, interstate traffic, international commerce, protecting us from foreign invasion. That's what the federal government was created for. It wasn't created for domestic regulation. And when the state or the federal government comes in here and mandates, whether it's we're talking COVID restrictions, or whether we're talking about interfering in local school meetings, that is a
Like
domestic issue, and that's a state sovereign issue. Federal government has no rights here. And what he's describing here is the fact that as the sheriff here, and you're the elected superior enforcement agent of the government here, you have the right to deny
You're really
federal
subject to the
authorities to
government.
come into Idaho
county.
on fabricated a policy, which is in
Yeah, so-
violation, well, let me finish.
Okay.
Which is in violation of both of the federal Constitution as well as the Idaho Constitution both. And you're sworn as an officer of the state to uphold and protect our liberties under that Constitution. And I really respect what I hear coming from you here. What do you do when you see a conflict of laws? And when I say the word laws, I use it very liberally, because I don't think mandates fit law at all. Executive orders operate upon the agencies of government. For instance, the federal government, when Biden issues an executive order and says that we have to do these things, who he's talking about is the officers of government.
Correct.
He's not talking about American citizens, and he's certainly not talking about Idaho citizens.
Correct.
And the same is true of Governor Little. When Governor Little issues an executive order in Idaho, if you go to Title 46, I don't know the exact section of it, Title 46, if you read it, when it talked about the emergency powers of the governor, it talks about his powers to marshal the resources of the state. And that was referring to state agencies, state personnel, the budget of the Idaho legislature. He can get funding from the federal government. Nowhere in Title 46 does it say that he has the right to dictate the conduct of you and me. And that includes vaccines, and it includes masking.
Based on executive order.
Based on executive order. There is no legislative authority for it, and if the legislature were to approve it, it doesn't make it the law if it violates the Constitution. And that's what this discussion is about. I really am pleased to come here and hear you talking the Constitution and talking Jordan Peterson. He's one of my heroes. I think he's a great guy.
Yeah, I like that.
If you haven't seen him, check him out, Jordan
He's good.
Peterson.
I like him.
But my point and my question is this. If there is a conflict of law, for example, coming from the executive order that violates a constitutional protection of mine and everybody in here, or if there's an executive order that comes from President Biden that is violative of of Idaho sovereignty and of our constitutional rights, as sheriff, how do you treat those violations of law?
Well, I would take it back to, I have a duty to protect.
I'm sorry?
I have a duty to protect. I have a duty
Yes.
to all the people to protect.
Okay.
And I have to make sure that if there is something that is not clear in law, and we're not, if it's not clear and set down in law, and there is a question as to whether that is a constitutional demand, you know, in conjunction with the Constitution, there's a question on that. Obviously, I can't, I hate in entertaining hypotheticals, although a lot of this has been brought about by the pandemic. It's painted it for us, right? And it's bringing some clarity to some areas that are making us sit up and pay attention. So in that way, it's valuable, right? Because there's a whole lot more people that now understand the emergency powers that were given to the governor, and are at least looking at them, that maybe hadn't before, right? So that's valuable. But to answer your question, I am not going to do something that does not afford you the due process of law. That's one of the reasons I don't like these red flag laws that were getting thrown around, talking about the seizing of firearms. My biggest problem with the red flag laws is an ex parte order. It's taking someone's firearm based on somebody else's statement. That's not due process.
So
right?
let me ask a question on that question. When you say due process, does that mean I'm going to arrest this person first and make sure he gets his time in court?
No, what that means is if there's a situation where we're trying to implement something that doesn't afford due process, it is not appropriately set down, and it's not clear, then to me, how do we enforce that? And we had some of that with some of what was going on with portions of the masking, right? Well, we want you to, we would like you, the enforcers, to go out and do X, Y, Z. And you saw different levels of engagement in the states, right? The issue is, how do you enforce something like that? When somebody says, hey, now you've got to wear a mask or else. That's really difficult, because the reality is how we do the majority of what we do is through the compliance of the citizens, right? The citizens agree, hey, I agree with this law, it's constitutional, I'm gonna uphold it. When we lose that, if you think we can enforce it, it is not gonna happen. And so we have to have the legislative branch engaged, and then it needs to be a law that meets the standard of the Constitution. When we start passing executive branch decisions that are enforcing things, that's where we can get into trouble. And I don't like it, I don't think, any more than you do.
Okay.
Right? But I am not going to do anything that is unlawful, violating a person's constitutional rights. I'm not gonna do it. But I would have to start having discussions with, I have a county attorney, I'm gonna talk to him. We're gonna meet with the magistrates and we're gonna talk to them. We're gonna talk with our prosecuting attorney. And we're gonna say, is what is happening here lawful and within the Constitution? We will make a decision together, right? That's how it would happen. Again, we work together on these kinds of issues. So where it's a hypothetical, it would depend on what was occurring and how we are protecting the citizen.
Okay, let me add
And
a
their
thought
rights.
onto that, and I appreciate that. And if it's an executive order, and I don't believe executive orders operate against the private citizen. That's my interpretation of the Constitution, and I have a right to interpret it, just like the Chief Justice of the United States does. That's what Rosa Parks did when she got on the bus. So let me go along that thought. When they mandated mask orders in Idaho Falls, and the city of Idaho Falls, by the way, has no power. In fact, the governor even said so. He said, you have no authority as municipal corporations, you mayors, to mandate masks in the state, period. He said it in his executive order. When that executive order came from the governor, I sent him a letter, and I sent you a letter that said, I'm telling you now, I don't consent. If you're silent when government tells you you have to do something, your silence is taken as being implied consent. I sent a letter to Mayor Casper. I sent one to you, because I respect your office, and we'd never met, and I sent one to the governor and the Secretary of State, and I don't remember who all to. But when these orders are made, as a matter of law, we are believed to comply with them, implied to consent to them, unless we make our voice known. And I did send you a letter, and I sent it certified mail, so I'd have a record of it, and I put Mayor Casper on it. My point simply is this, sheriffs, as well as private citizens, every one of us have a duty, and I agree with Chris Ann Hall, by the way. I don't think that she was saying insurrection at all. What she was saying is, as private citizens, you have the power, as a sovereign individual, as the state of Idaho is a sovereign state, you have the right to say, I don't consent, especially if it doesn't have the power of the Constitution behind it. So I really appreciate you being here. I really do. Thank you. And listening to our concerns.
I guess the only other thing I would say to that is, look, you are a citizen, and you have your rights in place. If you are dealing with a law enforcement professional who tells you you are under arrest, that is not the time to argue. That is the time to say, okay. And because you get your opportunity in court to explain why that was unlawful.
But they
and
mess up
everything
the rest
else
of
that
your
happened.
week and month.
But the minute that a peace officer says to you, you are under arrest, what the law says is he can use all force reasonable and necessary to effect that arrest. So what you do is you comply.
And I agree with you.
And
I
then
agree with you.
and then you can have the discussion later.
You get the discussion with the judge.
Sure.
I agree.
And that's that, but too often what's happening in our society is people believe that they can have this out with the cop, out on a traffic stop, and they begin to tell the officer, you can't tell me what to do. Well, guess what? As executive branch, we can. And you can disagree with me all day long, and I'm happy to stand up here and talk, but please, for the deputies and the officers that are out there serving, be respectful of their position. And when they tell you you're under arrest, you're under arrest. Comply, and then you get your day in court. And if you win, great. But that's just remember that.
Actually, when he says you're being detained, you're under arrest. That's the time to shut your mouth and invoke your Fifth Amendment rights. And you go to court and you have it out with the judge. That's where you go have your argument.
Yeah, we're
Yes,
judges
back
at
here,
all.
back row.
Question, kind of off topic, but are you guys being pressured to implement a vaccine mandate for the sheriff and the deputies? And how is it affecting you guys?
So we have come under zero pressure thus far to do anything like that. I don't know where this is headed. I'm watching with bated breath, just like everybody else is. I was surprised to see what was coming from our executive office of the presidency. I was surprised to see that. So I'm watching, but the issue is we are local government, and so we do not come under that. Now, there are ways that potentially there could be a situation created. And I'm not going to mention those because I don't want to give any of them any ideas. So I want to watch and pay attention to what happens next. But it's interesting to me how on one hand they try to argue freedom of choice, and on the other hand they're mandating everybody to get a vaccination. That's a duality I have a hard time jumping through. So I don't understand it.
Sure.
Yes.
He just had his hand up for a while.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. Your beard, you're blending in with that brown background.
So we have legislation at both the state and in Bonneville County at the county level that says Idaho is a Second Amendment sanctuary. Can you explain what that law is and what it isn't? Like, do you just not cooperate with federal law enforcement? Are you going to prevent them from enforcing something unconstitutional?
So there is actually a law on the books in Idaho that prohibits me from cooperating with any kind of a seizure of firearms. And it's set out there because the truth is we take firearms every day, but we do it lawfully and for a good reason, right? If somebody calls me and says, hey, my brother just told me he's gonna shoot himself, can you go over there and check on him? And sure enough, we find him thinking about it, and we get the pistol away from him. We're gonna take that with us for safekeeping. Now, obviously, he's gonna be able to get that back, but we take firearms all And then there's sometimes we find individuals who are prohibited, right? They cannot lawfully possess a firearm. They've been convicted of a felony, and trust me, you don't want them to have one. These are not the guys you want packing guns, right? So we take those and we charge them. And we charge them quite often under federal statutes because it's a bigger hammer. So we're talking about drug runners running with guns. Sometimes they're not even lawfully in the United States, and they're convicted felons and they're in possession of weapons. You certainly want us taking those, right? And charging those individuals appropriately. So we do that kind of stuff all the time. But we cannot do a confiscation from the citizens of firearms. We are prohibited under our state law from doing that. So that's when you talk about a sanctuary, that's what that is. And it's just backing up the Second Amendment saying, we're not going to allow that here.
What if they call it an exchange, how they're saying?
Where you buy back, a buyback, we cannot participate in that. We're prohibited under the
You're
state
interested
law.
in that, I'm buying all of them.
He used to tell me he runs out of money, or if his wife catches it.
When you say we, what do you mean?
Any peace officer in the state of Idaho is prohibited.
So like you're saying they just can't come to your house and like grab
Correct.
under the exchange or confiscation?
Under whatever.
Talking about?
Yeah, so basically this kind of started back under Obama's administration, and they were worried about a gun confiscation, and that's when that started, right? And
So if the
basically-
federal government came in, you could stop them, or you could just?
Well, we're not gonna participate with them.
Oh, but you
I
can
can
stop.
tell you, I don't have any Apache helicopters. See ya. I don't have tanks, you know. It depends on how they're coming. I mean, quite honestly, let's be realistic. You know, if the federal government was to usurp its authority and force us, now we have a big problem, right? We have a huge problem. What's that?
Now we have war.
Yeah, and so guys, I don't ever want to be in that position. I would much rather stand up here and talk to you guys all day. Let's have the discussions. Let's make our government as strong as it can be. Let's make it better. Let's address our grievances to the government appropriately. You can't threaten, people. You gotta do it appropriately. And you all seem like nice people. I think you're all capable of that. But you gotta be involved. You gotta be involved with it. Yes, sir.
Are you gonna see a conflict with legislation that's just been passed in the House for the red flag confiscation? Is there an overall feeling within the department that if that becomes law,
Is that something that just happened?
it was just passed by the House?
It was
By
in the
House.
NDA.
It is not been through the Senate.
It had not been to the Senate.
Obviously, if we have something that comes out like that, yeah, it's difficult for me to entertain hypotheticals. All I can tell you is anything that doesn't afford due process in the seizing of a firearm isn't appropriate, in my opinion. It has to have due process. You have to have the opportunity to go before the magistrate for us to take property. It's that simple. Whether that's a firearm or your vehicle, whatever it is. So, yes, ma'am.
I have a question with you being our highest elected official in Bonneville County. Can you tell us how many of the people who have crossed our border that we call immigrants, who have broken our law, are in the county of Bonneville?
I have no idea. I can't tell you that number.
Why can you not?
Because we don't know it. Quite literally, if they've crossed the border unlawfully and they've gotten into the interior of the country, nobody knows that number. They can guess at it, but the whole point is they bypass the lawful process. Now, whatever else is going on at the southern border, and I'm hearing a lot of different things, and there are a lot of concerned sheriffs. And Sheriff Donahue from Canyon County, he sits on the National Sheriff's Association Board of Directors. And he has gone to the southern border. He comes back and tells us, our Sheriff's Association here in the state of Idaho, we talk with each other. And that's how we decide what legislation we're going to back as sheriffs or sign off on, those kinds of things, as a body. And he's been down to the border and inspected that, and it's concerning. Everybody sees it, everybody knows that the border has been porous for a long time. This isn't a recent problem. It's been going on for a while.
Right, but it's a much bigger problem.
Yes.
Who in our state would know that? Does the governor know that? Does he get those?
I don't think it's knowable, because now, if you're talking about how many documented aliens, then we can get that number, that's no problem. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has that. Those are people that are part of the lawful process, right? The ones that are outside the lawful process, we don't know.
Ghosts.
Yeah, they're ghosts inside, you know? And we
I'm
interact
getting a
with
number
them.
from a number of legislators and, elected officials, and they don't have it. And right now, there may be busloads of individuals being dropped off, near refugee resettlement, agencies here in the state of Idaho.
Yeah, so that's the number you're looking for, is the number that they're bringing from the border, that the
Well, yeah,
agencies are
but
bringing. to
there's
the
all
interior.
kinds of people coming.
Yeah,
But there's nobody knows.
I don't think we have a good number. Now, Immigration and Customs Enforcement would have the number, if, say they were to have relocated folks, Immigration and Customs Enforcement would have that number. They should have that number, because that's what I'm hearing, is they're taking a certain number of aliens and bringing them into, different areas inside the country. How accurate that is, I don't know, but they have to be doing something with them, because they're coming across the border in large groups. So wherever they're resettling them, Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Border Patrol, which is an arm of that, should have.
Don't tell you that they're coming, or how will they
What's that?
I have a problem with the federal government being able to put them in our states without our governor's permission.
I can see
Well,
why.
I mean, Bonneville County,
That would be
we
a good.
don't have a clue, so we don't know the safety of those people, and we don't know our safety, because you don't know how many.
Well, I can tell you, I haven't been contacted by anybody to tell me that they were doing that. That may be a more appropriate question for the governor's office, because he would probably be aware if they had done that. I would certainly hope he would be aware if they had relocated folks.
So last year,
Through
there was a citation with undocumented individuals in Bonneville County.
Say that again?
In the last year, have you had any incidents
Oh,
with
yeah.
undocumented individuals?
Oh, yeah.
Do you
Yeah, we have them all the
that?
time. Yeah, we interact with people that are not lawfully in the country all the time.
Or do you have
I can get you a number. I know we contact, Immigration Customs Enforcement when we realize they're not lawfully in the country. We're required to do that. And we do that through the processes in the jail. So yes, I can get you a number on that. Go ahead.
Question, can you explain to me, I'm kind of confused about, what's going on with Brad Little and this vaccine passport? The stuff, that, Janice put out to let people know that they're planning on doing a vaccine passport in Idaho? Is that true, or can you?
I have no information on the vaccine passport other than probably what you heard. I haven't heard that they're for sure doing any kind of a vaccine passport. Janice, the lieutenant governor, would probably know better than I would. So I would go.
Where do you stand if they do try to implement a passport? Because I don't wanna end up like Australia.
Yeah, no. No, certainly not. I think Australia is a good example of what we don't do. The issue there is. I could see a reason that you may wanna be able to present a document that shows that you've been vaccinated. For example, you may wanna go to, say, I don't know, a Caribbean island somewhere. And you really wanna go to that island, and this is your decision, right? So you have gotten your vaccination, and that island is only gonna let you in if you have a certified document, passport, from your state or your government that says that you've been vaccinated. That's the reason why I could see somebody wanting to get it.
Okay,
But, we all know the other problems that could be.
the problem that I have is there's something called HIPAA laws. And if they pass a $1.9 trillion bill, and in that bill it states OSHA can be changed in the regulations, which means they can enforce the mandate which says you're allowed to reject it or something I'm against. How do we stop that, or where do you stand on our civil liberties? Because even if I get vaccinated, I still could get sick. So why are we enforcing this? Because I feel like it's not.
So just so you know, I'm not, nor is my office enforcing that.
Yeah.
And so.
But what about Brad Little, if he pushes that, or you
Well,
guys gonna stand?
I think you would end up, you guys are aware that, our state is, involved in the lawsuit on the vaccine mandates.
No. Are we?
Yes.
I-
Yes, our state is one of the states that has shouted back to the federal government, it's not lawful for you to do this. And so the governors are already engaging, our governor being one of those governors that has had his voice in that, right? But there's reasons that they have to do things a certain way to redress that with the government, but it's happening. They're doing it right now. So I think the one thing that's important is, watch where you're getting your information from, because realize, guys, I want you to know that social media is not being active in your community, okay? Going on social media and sending a post does not mean that you're really making a difference. And there are things going on in the social media circles that I believe create division, right? We should be able to come together as people and just talk. And social media is great for certain things, but I also think it's just fomenting a lot of division. And that's not safe for us. We need to be able to come to an agreement on how the government is going to manage this ongoing pandemic. And there may be people out there that want a vaccine passport. That's very different than mandating a vaccine passport. And so certainly we should be able to have some discussion around that and not instantly jump to the fact that everybody's gonna be mandated. Now, again, I don't think the executive branch at the federal level, the president, I don't think it was helpful for him to start mandating for the federal sector, the vaccine. And I'm sure we all have very strong personal opinions about that, but that's the crux of where we're at, and now the governors are shoving back, so.
I'm gonna step in for a second. We do need to wrap this up. I appreciate that, but I have seen some few hands that
Sure,
didn't
and I
get a
have a hard
chance
time
to.
saying
You know, and-
I have a hard time picking them all out.
Yeah, and I know, and I'd just like to make sure that we did. Dorna, you had a question, so.
You touched on this right at the beginning about the propaganda. Okay, and something like what is being portrayed in social media or news media is not really what's happening.
Well, what I would say is it is an interpretation, right? So it is an interpretation of what's occurring. So I think you have to realize that a lot of times you'll have a fact, and then that fact is going to be presented in such a way that is going to cause somebody to be incensed by it. So in a given day, you have thousands of events that occur, and then you have a news cycle that has to pick from those events what they're going to report on at the national level. You had all these things occur, but only these 5 things get reported. So what do we really know, right? And that's always the case. It's always been that way. The only difference is now you have other news things coming in, some that are appropriate and some that quite honestly are just misinformation. They're not true. And so they're out there on social media telling you things that are not accurate. They're not backed by law or policy. It's not anything that's actually happening, and people are buying off on that, and they're getting into the conspiracy theories. You know, maybe there are some of you in the room that believe that the earth is flat. I do not believe that, but there's a whole society out there that believes that the earth is flat.
They're have the proof.
They're quite serious about it, right? And so that's just a light example I would give you. So it's not necessarily that it's even intentional. It's just that in our information age, there is so much information out there that it can become difficult to decide which sources you're going to listen to. And especially when we begin to question what we originally thought were solid sources, right? We thought it was a solid source, and now we start to question it because it seems like they're playing games with the information, and we become uncomfortable with it. And that's the danger, because quite often media is called the 4th branch of government. And there's a reason, because they have a responsibility to report the facts. You get to decide your opinion, but they should report the facts of the event. That's what we want, right? The facts of the event, let us decide.
So my first source would be go to the scriptures. The scriptures are solid.
But I think you would also understand that there may be an individual in this room that doesn't feel that way. And because of our republic and the way we're built, that's okay.
I agree with that.
Right. But for you, that's a source, right? So, and we have to respect that with one another.
Okay, I'm just checking,
I'll let
Jason,
you
did
pick.
you have a question?
Yeah, mine was pretty quick and simple. You said that because of drug addiction, we're at risk of losing a generation.
I say, I fear that.
You were fear that. What generation or what age group is most affected by the drugs in our community right now?
Well, every age group is affected by the drugs in our community, but certainly those adolescents, right? So you're talking that impressionable age where you're, 10, 12 years old, and you're moving into life there, and you're experimenting with things and wondering what, you don't believe your parents anymore, especially when you're 15 or 16 years old, right? Your parents don't know. And so you're in that transitional phase in your life and trying to figure out who you are. The frontal lobe of your brain is not fully matured, so you're a little rapid in your decision making, right? And so you've got all this stuff going on. That's a really at-risk group. So adolescents, teens, and early 20s, right? That's a really big risk area for developing a drug addiction. But it can happen at any point in life. I've known people that were quite...
My first interactions, I was 4.
You were 4? Yeah. That can happen, right? That can happen. So it's never too early to have these discussions with your kids about the dangers of drugs and what it means. But there's also a lot of people that went and they had a serious injury and they got medical treatment and got addicted to an opiate, right? That happens too. And so but hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no.
Okay, just a second. Dave, he's had it out, and then Shuri, and then the lady back here.
So, I'm wondering, how much military equipment, you guys were at Water Springs a while back. You were raising money to get body armor that would withstand rifle fire. Long guns are a small portion of gun crime. I'm wondering how much military equipment your force has received and if there's any strings tied to that. I'm concerned about where the loyalties of the department are.
Sure.
You have to agree to certain things with the federal government to receive toys from the military. That's my concern.
So currently, we have no active surplus equipment from the military. We have a Bearcat. I think you've seen that. That is a purpose-built armored vehicle that's built for law enforcement to engage in high-threat situations. And we have been shot at. I think 3 times we've exchanged gunfire out of that, or taken shots in that vehicle. And so it saves lives. That was purchased through a grant process that was part of our local bomb team. So our bomb team is tied to federal oversight. So it's a bomb team that covers all of eastern Idaho, and basically everything from Twin Falls over all the way to the Montana border. And it has 2 members from our sheriff's office and 2 members from the Idaho Falls Police. And they are equipped to disrupt explosive devices. And so that armor was actually purchased in conjunction with them and is able to be utilized by both SWAT units, ours and the City of Idaho Falls SWAT unit. And so that's how we got that piece of equipment. And it is through a federal grant, but that has since expired as far as any strings attached. And basically the strings attached to that are things like we have to have an equal employment opportunity clause in our law, like we don't discriminate against people for employment. We have to have all of our auditing and stuff has to be up to federal standard as a county, just things like that. So it's just really saying that you have to be a squared away organization that's doing things right in order to receive this money. So that's the one piece of equipment that I would say was tied there. But I will tell you, there are a lot of processes in the counties that if we weren't able to leverage some of those federal dollars, we couldn't do some of the things we do. Right now, we're looking at a jail expansion to expand our special housing area, which is underbuilt, where that's where we put people that are sick or mentally ill, and we can't put them in the general population. That was underbuilt in our jail. It's always been overcrowded. We've been trying to work through that process, and we're looking at using federal dollars to expand that. So As far as being holden to the federal government, I wouldn't characterize it that way. It's just that we have to meet certain standards to be able to receive the money.
Okay, so I wanna thank you for being transparent about that.
Sure.
One other thing, you said you guys would never take, property without due process.
Correct.
So am I to assume that the sheriff's department does not, participate in civil asset forfeiture?
So we do participate in civil asset forfeiture of certain items that are related to drug crime, right? So if you have a vehicle, you've been driving your vehicle, and you've been selling us drugs, and I'm not talking about little bindles, I'm talking about you're a trafficker of narcotics into our county. We will seize your vehicle and we will move for forfeiture under the asset forfeiture process, which is due process. They do get due process in that, but we seize the vehicle. But that is related to those types of crimes, and that is kind of the area. And we have seized some homes with civil asset forfeiture, and again, for drug trafficking crimes. I'm not talking about, you had a joint in your house. I'm talking about somebody who was using a home as a location where they were trafficking drugs into the community out of that home. So there have been occasions that we have done that.
So my concern is a lot around the country, a lot of times, police will just decide that this is a large sum of money. They determine that it's a large sum of money, assume it's from, so that's really what my concern was. Cause I had a friend stop in Beaverhead County because he ran a coffee fund at work and had hard bottle ones on his pocket. He got pulled over because a convenience store clerk saw that large wad of bills, didn't realize it was just ones. Spent 3 hours on the side of the road.
Oh, no.
So we don't do that kind of thing.
Well, we will seize large amounts of cash, but it's not ones in somebody's pocket. It's the duffel bag of money that we know is tied into cartel level trafficking. We're certainly gonna take that, right? But we do it with appropriate processes to identify the fact that we are intercepting drug funds. So we will, but not in a level that is not reasonable, I guess is the way I would say it, and not without due process.
Sherry?
Yeah, so this question goes back to what you said in the beginning when you said you watched Chris Hall's movie, and you said that she commented that sheriffs were just enforcing laws blindly, and you didn't agree with her point of view in that. So my question goes is that in the history of the United States, there has been some dark laws that have been passed, and the courts did nothing to say that they were violating human rights. I mean, you go back to the South and slavery and extermination orders on certain groups of people. Where is your stance in saying that they do pass a law like similar to what they have done, rounding the people in the Japanese internment camps? What is your position? Do you feel that if you say, no, I'm not gonna do that you're an insurrectionist? Or that you'd be like, I don't agree with this is violating their rights, and how do you play the role of the insurrectionist? Or if you just feel that is, I'm not gonna round up the Japanese for the internment
So I
camps.
think we need to be mindful of history, just as you laid out for us, and I think that's so important, because then that helps us move forward into the future. Like I said about, with Dr. Jordan Peterson, where he says you should read history as though you were a perpetrator.
Yeah.
Right? So when I look at that, and individuals were enforcing some of the Jim Crow laws, and they were enforcing some of the things that at the time of their, of that point in history was accepted, right? What we gotta recognize is generally as individuals, we wanna go along to get along, right? As an elected official, I have to ask the hard questions. And if I feel that a law is violating the Constitution, I certainly have to add my voice to the fact that I do not believe that that's appropriate. And if I end up in a position where I cannot enforce the laws, then I have a decision, right? Which is that if I have to lay aside my office in order to send a message that this is not okay, that's what I would have to do. You have to realize that the governor can remove me from office. It's set down in our Constitution in the state. He can say, Sheriff, you're failing to enforce the law. I'm removing you from office, and I am placing the Attorney General of the state of Idaho over your office for operations. That can happen, right? So what I have to do is have the discussion and say, why are we doing this? And as I promised you, I'm not going to do things that clearly fail the duty to protect, right? The duty to protect and preserve life. I take very seriously the first item that I'm entrusted with, that I'm told are my duties in the state law. The very first one is preserve the peace. And I see myself and all of my deputies as peace officers, primarily. We preserve the peace in our communities. And so that's what I would do. I would act in conjunction with that. Being a hypothetical, you can't give me a specific, you've given some examples of like putting people in internment camps. I could not knowingly do that. I just couldn't. But if you tell me that we have somebody who we believe is making explosive devices and intending on blowing something up, and they might be tied to a terrorist organization, I'm certainly going to do everything I can to bring that person into custody and make sure that they're presented to the courts to be processed and in conjunction with the prosecutors, right? So we just have to work the laws and make sure that if we disagree with one, we have to have the discussion, which we do all the time with the legislative branch.
Ma'am, back there.
I have an easy question and a hard question. I'll ask the easy one first. Are you familiar with the CSPOA, or are you a member?
I am familiar, and I am not a member, and I can tell you why. So that's the first part. Would you like why?
Yes.
Okay. So
What is the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association?
Yes, yeah. So Sheriff Richard Mack, who was a sheriff for one term in Arizona, Graham County, Arizona, he's been around for a while. I think he's a decent guy, or a decent man for the most part. I'll tell you what made me feel like, hey, we're getting on the wrong side of things here. At the Bundy Ranch, which I know you're all familiar with in Nevada, when BLM was down there were some incidences that occurred down there, and Sheriff Mack, former Sheriff Mack, said to put the women up front so that if the agents shot, they would hit the women. That is a terrorist behavior. I will never condone that. We are peace officers. We never put the innocent up front. We always step forward. I will never condone anyone who speaks that way. And that happened. And shortly after that, there were 2 deputy sheriffs in Las Vegas, Nevada, in a CC's Pizza, who were shot and murdered while they were eating their lunch, just because they had on a uniform. And the guy that shot them had been at the Bundy Ranch. Now, I know they kicked him out of there, but my point being, whether you're far right or far left, there's always somebody on the fringe willing to burn it down. And when you're shooting your peace officers in the head while they're eating their lunch, men who had families, and you only killed them because of the star, right? I can't hang with people like that. And we have to realize when we foment violence, that very rapidly our society will go away.
Well,
This thin veneer.
I'm sorry you would associate Mr. Mack with that act, because I think that's very inappropriate. You're connecting him with an act of violence.
What I'm saying is, that happened in conjunction with an individual who was present for a period of time there. That's what I'm saying.
And he was kicked out.
Okay.
They didn't condone what he did either.
And maybe
Good.
that was
So don't
the hard
associate
question
him with
to
that.
ask.
That's really inappropriate.
So,
That was the easy one.
so the point I'm making is, if we're discussing peaceful demonstration, if we're discussing peacefully standing up, or are we leveling firearms at our personnel that are out there protecting us? That's the difference. And if you want me to get behind an organization that, in my opinion, on that event said put the women up front, I can't do that. Okay?
And I
So
don't
should
know
we-
that the
should we
organization
associate
said
your
that, or
office
if it
with
was the man
with
that
Derek
said that.
Chauvin then?
With who?
With Derek Chauvin, should we
Chauvin.
associate your office with Derek Chauvin who killed George Floyd? So because a cop did that, should we assume that you're gonna do that? That's the same logic.
You're throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Hey, excuse me, this has been a really good conversation. And what I don't wanna see in place of my sheriff is to start to go downhill by us saying, we're gonna compare this to this, and we're gonna compare
He opened the door.
I understand
He opened the
that. I
door.
understand that, but we were
With
making a
respect.
comparison, sir.
Don't walk through it.
So, we're not gonna go down in the mud here. because
So,
it's been a great
so I will tell you
let's
this.
end it.
You
I
know,
will
I
tell you-
respect your opinion,
Okay, Dennis,
and you're right to say it.
So,
think
so I,
most people here
let,
can agree with you.
let me speak to this, let me tell you. I apologize,
Thank you.
because I did not mean to directly conflate
Thank you.
Sheriff Mack, or former
Thank you.
Sheriff Mack, with that violent thing.
Thank
That
you.
wasn't what I was trying to do. I don't believe that he was the cause of that violence.
Very good.
But what I wanna say is, we have to be careful when we're talking about, resistance, that we gotta be making sure that we're talking about lawful resistance, right?
Thank you for answering.
That's,
I
that's,
agree. Thank you. Thank you.
so can we
And that
agree?
makes
You and I
sense
can
to
get
me
along just
why
fine,
you
but I
may
just
not
don't want that
want
to
to
get too associated by
the
implications.
Sure, okay, that's
So
fair.
my difficult question, I'm sorry that I didn't mean to stir
No, you're fine.
stuff up there,
Yep.
I was just curious, I didn't know that about it, so I appreciate knowing that. And I know we've kind of skirted around this the whole evening, but I know that what a lot of people are thinking, that we've had two things happen in the last 2 years that have really gotten our attention. And one is that executive orders can happen with the premise of keeping us safe, when there's really not a lot of proof behind it. I'm sorry, they're just 99.9%, we're good, not to say it's not real or anything like that. That and the language being changed, the shalls being turned into mays without the legislative process, and people going to a school board meeting being called terrorists. That is what has us all in a heightened state of concern. And I know the burning question for all of us is, if it comes down to something like that, where the actions of our government are unconstitutional, and you have no doubt in your mind that that is what is happening, what is that going to look like? You mentioned, I will step out of my office. We need somebody who will stay in office and
Amen.
stand by
Good
our
way to say it.
side.
Amen.
So.
Amen.
That's what we're all wondering, if it comes to that, and I'm a PCO, I'm all for the legislative process, okay?
Right, okay.
If it comes to that, what does that look like for our sheriff, who is the one who stands between us and an unconstitutional government?
Well, obviously, I'm not going to abandon my responsibilities, right? I'm not gonna abandon my responsibilities and say, oh, good luck. But what I want you to realize is, if I was to step forward and say that these laws are not enforceable, they're in violation of the Constitution, and an executive at the governor's level was to say, Sheriff, you're failing to do your duty, he can remove me. That's what I want you to understand. And it's set down that those authorities are in place. I do not want to be in a position that I'm fighting against my own government. I just do not. So I would certainly raise my voice and my arguments as to why I felt the way I did. But I am not a power unto myself. That's what I want you to take away, because sometimes there are organizations out there that want you to believe that we are, as sheriffs, the highest authority and the power unto ourselves, and we are not. We aren't. And that's very clear through the law. We enforce the law, and I would do my level best to stand with you and profess whatever that problem was. But at the end of the day, I certainly hope we never get there, right? But I'm not gonna abandon you, if that's your question. I'm not gonna just fold. Does that help?
Okay, 3 more questions, and there'll be 1, 2, and 3. Okay,
Thank you, Sheriff Hulse. I think that we don't want to get confused here. It's too bad that certain things have happened, and it's too bad that Sheriff Mack did that. And I can't explain that. Our question simply is, since there are 14 counties in Idaho that have constitutional sheriffs who have taken the training that train them in that, and they can actually certify that they that they constitutionally represent the people and will protect them. What we would like to know is, are you one of those, even though you're not listed as one of the 14 sheriffs who is considered a constitutional sheriff? We want one.
I hope you know, because you and I have talked before, but I hope you know that I am a constitutional sheriff. I
guarantee it and get certified.
Well, again, when you have, that is not the authority. The CSPOA is not the authority on whether or not I'm a constitutional sheriff.
It is a
no, it is.
It would give a lot of people a lot of
it is a
reassurance.
Individual who started an organization, and you know, the issue is, I'm happy to talk to those other 14 sheriffs and find out why they believe that they find value in the CSPOA, right? I'm fine to do that. I have no problem doing that. I want to have discussion and dialogue. I was disappointed when I read about what had happened at the Bundy Ranch with Sheriff Mack when that occurred. And that's kind of where I'm at. You know, I'm not going to sign on to an organization whose head of it is someone who advocated for women to be placed in harm's way in a violent, what was potentially a very violent action about to occur. I want you to think about that for a minute. That would be like me saying, my wife Michelle, come stand here in front of me to protect me, right?
Sure.
It's not okay. And it is a tactic that is used by the wrong types of individuals. Our soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq have experienced that over there with them putting human shields in front of them.
I wonder if there's something more to that. I would really like to talk to Sheriff Richard Mack about
maybe there
that.
is,
and they had the choice to do it themselves.
I am okay to have those discussions, but I just want you to realize that just because I don't sign off to an organization like that, I am a member of the Idaho Sheriff's Association. I am a member of the Tri-County Sheriffs, and I'm a member of the National Sheriffs. And I can tell you that all of us take our constitutional responsibilities very seriously, right? We do. And I am a constitutional sheriff, and I will respect your rights and make sure that they're upheld. That's my responsibility to do so. And you have that promise from me.
Thank you.
I have sworn an oath to do that.
This topic is something you spoke about earlier, about that you have routinely, your group has routinely dealt with undocumented aliens. What happens to them?
So it depends. It depends on the level of offense, right? So if we've arrested them on a DUI or something like that, then potentially immigration is going to contact them. They're going to give them certain paperwork, and if they're done with us and we have nothing left to hold them, they're going to be turned loose. And if ICE doesn't retain them, put a retainer on them, they're going to go, right? So potentially that can happen.
Do you let ICE know?
Yes. We let my deputies let ICE know.
I mean, the reality, I understand how stupid that question sounds. Back when we had a real president, it mattered.
There was
now
an issue.
It doesn't.
No, we have always remained the same on that. That kind of got into the press, and there was a bunch of nonsense going on around that. We have always cooperated with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Nothing's changed for us. It's been this way for 20 years. Back when they were called INS, right? It's been this way. We cooperate with them. We know our responsibilities there. If we have an undocumented alien, we do the appropriate processes with that person. They're still a person, you know, we're gonna treat them appropriately. And they have certain fundamental human rights that we're gonna uphold. And that's important too, right? These are still people. They may not be lawfully in the country, but they're still people, and we need to be appropriate in our process. And ICE has a process of how they engage with that, and it's really about what the level of offense is that they've committed. And quite often they're employed in the area. That happens, we see that too.
Yeah, it's kind of like the addict thing. Yeah, got it.
Okay. Matt?
So I've been at the last couple nights with parents fighting for our children's rights. And I just want to know, are you going to back their legal rights as well? Because there's actually been a couple kids who have been expelled for not wearing masks. And so that's the only reason they were expelled. They're not allowed to come back to school until they mask up. Our daughter has chosen to not mask we appreciate you putting a mask on, but she's, like, some of the other kids have actually been expelled for not masking up. And to me, that's their legal right as a citizen of the state of Idaho.
So, you know, I'm always, for myself, I often think about rights and responsibility, right? So that's the other side of the coin of rights is responsibility. We all have responsibility, and sometimes where your rights begin, where your rights end, my responsibility begins, right? I have to do things to ensure that a person's rights are being protected. But we also have to realize that we're in unprecedented times.
But none of us are masked in here.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, none of us are masked.
So our kids need to be masked, but we
Right.
don't.
And the issue is, each of us have an individual stand that we're going to take on an issue. And if that is because you're not gonna mask in school, then whatever consequence follows from that, you have to be willing to grapple with. So what I mean by that is, that's outside, if they're going to expel them, that's a decision being made by a school board. I can't stop them from doing that. Now the discussion becomes what happens next. I think we're gonna learn a lot going through this process. But again, we're not gonna come in and enforce something inside the school like that. Although we are in discussions right now with District 93, which I understand they just put a mandate back in place. So we're gonna be having some discussions with them. I wish that we hadn't gotten to such a gray area on all this stuff and where it's kind of gone to. I can tell you that if everybody in here felt like we needed to mask, I would put a mask on. Because it's about being respectful. And that responsibility to be respectful to others. If I walk in somebody's home, our deputies, when they're around each other, they're not masking. But if we're going into somebody's home, we mask. Or if we're talking to somebody on a traffic stop, we're putting masks on. For whatever degree, it's become a sign of respect in that.
Because the kids don't have the choice.
Right.
They were
No,
told they have to or they can't.
I understand where you're at.
Can I piggyback on your question? So I had a situation where I was kicked out of the school because I was trying to register my kids for school. And the lady actually threatened to call the cops on me because I had 2 children with autism. And she demanded that we wear masks. And I stood up for their rights because within the parameters, they were allowed to not wear masks due to their sensory sensitive overload.
Yeah.
She threatened, and I'm standing there with another child who was neurotypical, and so I'm thinking, I'm about to get arrested for trying to get my kids registered for school, and I'm wondering, what are you directing your officers to do in those situations? Because she made me feel like, and a lot of other parents within the special needs group feel like we have no rights. We are being muted, we are being forced to comply at the risk of our kids.
Yeah, so that
It becomes trespassing, therefore becoming a legal issue, and then you come
And you
arrest
get
them
brought in.
because they're trespassing and won't leave.
Well, I can tell you that on a trespass, odds are you're not going to get arrested. You're not going to get arrested. You may get cited, but the issue
So
comes
is
down
that
to.
at the discretion of the officer handling the situation?
Yes.
Because I was maintaining my calmness best I could, just trying to get my child registered. She's mortified. I got one who's obsessing over doors and having a borderline meltdown, and I'm being attacked by a woman. And
So-
I was being told I was going to be called.
So I guess the best example I have for you is, look, we're there to preserve the peace. And if we come in and we got 2 people yelling at each other, being disorderly, sounds like you were being calm. We come in, we're gonna try to resolve the situation, right? To the lowest level possible, we're gonna resolve the situation. I can't speak to exactly what would happen, but all I can tell you is our deputies are gonna look at that situation and say, these children are not able to mask. And we're gonna talk through that.
And I don't mask for myself because my son has speech apraxia, and because of his issues, I've worn a mask in front of him because he had a meltdown. And so I don't mask for his
Because of
sake
that,
as well.
And that's the thing, one of the issues that we've gotten into here, just as I was cautious to not devolve into say, hey, it's all this group's fault, or it's all that group's fault, we have to stop doing that. Because the reality is, there are reasons that people don't mask.
So can you tell me what I can do in those situations if an officer is called, and what I can tell other people in that community with special needs kids, because there's a lot of concern.
So I think the biggest thing is you gotta be articulate, you gotta be saying, the reason I'm not doing this is because of these issues, and we're within our rights to not do this. And just assert that, and then if they call the officer over there, be calm and tell them the same thing. And 9 times out of 10, any of those processes are gonna go through with everybody agreeing to some sort of a solution to resolve one issue. And almost always in every one of these events, we've been able to manage that. Again, we're about keeping the peace. We don't wanna foment it to make it worse. We wanna be peaceful.
Okay,
Thank you.
we can go on all night. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
I appreciate, you know, those of you that have been able to stay later, this is drug on. Look, I just want you to know that you have a highly functional professional sheriff's office. That out here every day, they're doing hard work for you in the community. And I just want you to know that. And we have to talk a lot about what we do have. We have the ability to come together, sit down here in a room, and have a discussion. And we can be respectful with one another. We can find pathways forward. I'm willing to listen to anybody. I would just ask that you also think about your positions and question where you're coming from and what's our best pathway forward. Because if we become possessed by ideology, then all we can do is shove whatever ideology that is forward. We have to be critical thinkers. Let's be critical thinkers and let's preserve our republic.
Yes.
So thank you for your time, and it's my honor to serve.
I would really appreciate you being here and coming, and I would, like, there's 1,000 more questions. And I would ask again, would you entertain coming back and talking to us again?
Yes, and the other thing I would bring up with y'all, look, you can go through my office manager. If you go through our phone tree, there's a way that you get directly to her. If you want an appointment with me to see and visit with me, any citizen of Bonneville County wants to talk to me, can come talk to me. I will make the time for you. So if something wasn't covered here for you, you want to meet with me personally, or there was something you were uncomfortable saying in the group, and you want to know my personal opinion on something, I will do that. But realize I serve a role inside the government, and I have to honor that. So happy to have further discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's give you